Welcome to the Broker Podcast with Jack Stapleton, founder, co-owner, and broker of Realty Texas, one of America's most respected independent real estate firms. Early in his career, Jack was named Realtor of the Year, top producer, and helped over 1,000 families buy and sell properties. Later turned industry leader and broker, Jack founded Realty Texas and built it into an empire with over 400 agents, tens of thousands of transactions closed, with billions in production. As former board president, NLS chairman, real estate instructor, software engineer, and technology innovator, Jack knows what it takes to succeed at every level. Welcome to the Broker Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Broker Podcast. My name is Jack Stapleton, CEO and broker of Realty Texas, and with me today is Michael Potter, team lead, Realty Texas. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Jack. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you.
You know, I think this is probably our 5th podcast.
I think this is number 5.
This is number 5. Awesome. And today we actually have questions from some agents that sent it to us, so we're going to go through those.
What's your first question?
First question
I always like the questions.
I love these. I have a perfect question on how to address a buyer's refusal to use a buyer rep. And this agent actually sent kind of an example of a message that she got. And it says, I'm not represented by an agent for purchase because I'd like to structure my offer in a way that accounts for the absence of buyer commission, or keep that option open for dual representation if appropriate.
Was that a question from a consumer?
Yes, that was a response to a consumer.
Okay. Well, what I love about, having rights and being a real estate agent and being a consumer is that you have choices. And we're a profession where we're here if the consumer wants to hire us to do the job. And they hire us to do the job through either a listing agreement or a buyer-tenant representation agreement. And if the consumer doesn't want to hire us, then they can hire an attorney, or they can chat GPT it and figure it out on their own, or just walk through the transaction and do their best to navigate the waters. But if they don't want to pay commission and hire someone to do the job and do it themselves, that's their right. It's not the right of the agent to tell every consumer that they need to have representation. We should recommend that it's a good idea for them to have representation, but offering representation and demanding it is two different things.
It can be, yes.
We don't have the right to force a consumer to have representation. We don't get to help a consumer. We can't treat a customer like a client. We've got duties. Old car, obedience, loyalty, disclosure, reasonable care and diligence, accounting. We have that occurs once the representation agreement is signed and the duties are set in stone, and the consumer now has hired the agent, or literally the broker, and the broker has assigned the agent to facilitate the duties that are required both under the Texas Real Estate License Act and whatever it says in the representation agreement. So I read something like that, and I think more power to you. If you want to represent yourself in a transaction, no problem. We have a form at this firm when we represent a seller and we have a buyer that chooses to represent themselves, that we give them. We ask them to sign it, but it's a little bit like the information about brokerage services. It is a form that we give them. We have to give it to them. We would like their signature to acknowledge that we have given it to them, but we can't force them to sign it. But when we're representing the seller and we have an unrepresented buyer show up, we have a form that says, likely, in this transaction, the seller has offered compensation to reimburse the buyer for the buyer broker fee, and we are more than happy to assist you with the transaction if you'd like to hire us to do the job. But if you choose to work on your own, that is okay. Now, I have seen, it doesn't happen often, probably 24 situations over the last 20 years. And again, we've closed tens of thousands of transactions where buyers did want to do it on their own. And every single situation turned into a nightmare. And let me tell you why. The role of a real estate agent is partly psychiatrist and counselor. Buying a home is very stressful, and it's a prolonged situation. It's not, going to the grocery store and grabbing something off the shelf and, getting home and think, why did I buy this? You go under contract on a property, and 30 days later, 45 days later, you're closing the deal, and it can be a roller coaster ride. They're going to learn a lot about the property that they're purchasing through their inspections. News articles are going to come out about market shifts and changes, and the lender is going to be sharpening the pencil to try to get them a good payment quote so they really understand what their payment's going to be. And it's an up and down roller coaster, and the agent often helps alleviate the fears that the buyer has and helps them along with things. And when they have concerns and questions, we get them with the people who can truly answer those questions, like an inspector and a lender, and get them with people who are qualified and do that job for a living, not maybe this unrepresented buyer getting advice from people they ought not get advice from. So, when I see something like that, again, my answer is, more power to them. If they want to do it on their own, that's perfectly okay. Nowhere does it require that a buyer have representation. Now, from the seller side, I know that there's risk. There's probably a higher risk with that seller accepting that offer because you don't have the calm, steady hand of someone helping walk that buyer through the transaction. So they also don't know established norms. Not that every transaction has to follow established norms, but how you get into the property, how you formulate an offer, what disclosures do you need, what is appropriate for an inspection, maybe things the buyer might not know, maybe they order a static plumb test, which damages the property, and they're not allowed to do that without something in writing from a seller. So there are things that they can do that bring liability to the transaction, and the listing agent 100% represents the seller, and they can't have split loyalty. So the buyer sometimes can feel like, wow, this listing agent is really treating me unfairly because they'll never help me. Now, there's that word fairly, and it shows up in the Code of Ethics and some other places, but what the law thinks fair is, and what a buyer might think fair is there's probably a gap there. And fiduciary explains what fair is in that scenario in my mind, which is you can't have split loyalty. You have to put your client ahead of everyone else, including yourself, including the buyer. So we're going to be honest. We're going to make the proper disclosures, but we don't represent that buyer, and the number one thing we can't do is give them advice. And those buyers always come at us at advice.
Yep.
And that's where the agent has to say, I'm not your real estate agent. You hire a real estate agent to give you advice, and you're asking the seller's real estate agent for advice, and I can't give it to you. And I think that there's good proactive ways to have that conversation with the buyer and ways that maybe not so productive. And I think sometimes buyer or listing agents, might think, well, I'm going to help this buyer because it might be that the listing agent now is getting both sides of the compensation. Because the listing agreement says, if the seller has agreed to pay a broker fee and there is no buyer agreement, the listing broker has an agreement signed with that seller of what the compensation is going to be. And a buyer doesn't have the right to renegotiate the listing agent's and broker's agreement.
Nope, they do not.
They can negotiate whatever offer they want, but likely the seller is going to walk away from that transaction negotiating what the buyer feels fair, and the reason that they don't want an agent because they feel like they're going to take some percentages off, which they think is going to save the seller and the money, and that's often not the case.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
You got to understand the difference there. Thank you for that answer. Let's look at the next question that we have. This one is a very interesting one. So, at an agent right, they want to get your thoughts on the 50-year mortgage and how this could benefit and how it may not be for everyone.
It's not the first time that this has come up.
Mm-hmm.
Over the last 2 decades, I've heard this come up several times. It's important to understand that a 15-year mortgage has the lowest interest rate.
Mm-hmm.
A 30-year mortgage has a higher interest rate. And a 50-year mortgage is going to have even a higher interest rate. And with the rates that we have today, they're not going to introduce a 50-year mortgage at 15-year rates. It's just not going to happen. I always like to use this example. A $300,000 home, they're going to mortgage it for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say it's VA and 0% down. Let's say it's at 3% interest. You can go to a company like Bankrate and you can do this because people have a hard time believing this. So that 3%, $300,000 property over 30 years is a $600,000 repayment. $300,000 for the principal property, $300,000 in interest. That 3% interest pushes to 6%, $300,000 for the property, $600,000 in interest, $900,000 repayment. The 50-year mortgage is going to be at a higher interest rate. That means that, and by the way, the purpose of the 50-year is to amortize it over an extra 20 years, which is supposed to bring the payment down.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not going to. It's not going to bring it down to the point where people think that it's going to be able to hit their DTI or their debt-to-income ratio to actually make them be able to qualify for a home. That doesn't make a home more affordable. That makes a home more expensive because the interest over 50 years is going to be exponentially more than the 30-year, just like the 15-year. So I think if we're trying to address affordability, I think that maybe the federal government could do something a little different. Maybe our GSEs, government-sponsored entities, maybe they can offer a guaranteed 3% rate for owner occupants. If you're buying a home truly for owner occupancy, that there's a guaranteed 3% rate and somehow make that work. That is how you fix affordability. Because we know that the interest, especially in the first 5 years, is astronomically 99% of the payment is interest.
Mm-hmm.
Now, yes, you get to write that interest off, and that's one of the value adds of purchasing a home. But a 50-year mortgage, it's dead in the water. I don't believe it's going to happen. You don't see any support for it. Now, you might see some robber barons out there very excited about the prospect because they stand to really make a lot of money. Because you know how you hear that the first 5 years, most of the payment is interest? Now you're going to take that to 15 years, probably 10 years. 5 more years of paying 99% interest as your payment before the principal starts going down. So, if the federal government is looking for ways to make homes more affordable, I don't think it's a good idea to restrict home ownership. I've heard people say that maybe we should pull away from allowing investors to own so many properties. I'm not sure I'm going to, I don't think that matches who we are as a nation to restrict home ownership or investments. But I think that there needs to be more education out there to teach the buyers why they don't want to be a tenant. There needs to be more programs that will allow a homeowner to have the 3.5% down payment or lower. Get them into a property, give them a lower interest rate so that they can become a homeowner, get that property paid off so that they are no longer paying for a mortgage at all. Because that's the beauty about buying a home. But sometimes when you ask a question, you have to look at the motive behind the question.
Mm-hmm.
What is this 50-year mortgage about? And it is about trying to lower the bar of home ownership to first-time home buyers. And that's a house of cards. It's smoke and mirrors. And it might even rise to, being damaging to our entire structure. I could see that could create damage.
Yeah, I can see it as well because I'm looking at the banks wanting their money and not having that risk of paying on it forever. So getting all that interest up front, I can see it extending out a lot longer.
Yeah.
Instead of the normal little bit of 5 years or so before it starts tapering down a little bit. Think we got time for one more?
I mean, I'm all game for it.
Let's try. Let's see. This one's an interesting one. I've actually gotten some of these types of emails. But this question says, here's a question for you that I get inquiries or offers all the time. What are they exactly? And what are the pros and cons of this type of an offer? So she sends over an email that says, "Hi, we're a large real estate investment company looking to acquire properties in this area through various methods. We have identified your listing as a property with significant owner equity. Would your seller be open to seller finance deals where we put down between 5 and 10% of the purchase price, pay a reasonable interest rate in monthly payments, pay all closing costs, realtor commissions? The closing will happen 30 days or less, as this is an as-is purchase deal. And because the buyer pays all the closing costs, the buyer chooses the escrow company to close the deal. The seller can leave when they want. They can leave what they want behind. And we buy millions per month and can save the seller any large potential capital gain taxes as well."
Well, that's because they're stealing the equity. Equity scraping. Most of the time, first of all, that's not going to work well for VA, especially in a VA scenario where, if somebody wants to come in, the first question is, are they trying to do an owner finance or they're trying to do a wrap?
There is a big difference.
And I want to know, off the cuff, are they trying to do a seller finance or are they trying to do a wrap? The difference between, there are a lot of loans out there that are, 10 years old that are sitting at between 2 and 3%.
Mm-hmm.
And a loan assumption, a buyer has the right to go to the seller's mortgage company and petition to do a loan assumption. That's one thing. But a seller financing, the property has to be paid off. Every single loan that's attached to a property has what's called a due on sale clause, which means when the property sells, the lien has to be paid off in full. Now there is a loophole, I guess you could put it, that says that they have to send constructive notice to the lender that says this property is being sold. And if they don't respond within 30 days, then the lender waives their right to object. And it's, with technology that we have today, it's getting more and more likely that they will have an opportunity to object.
Mm-hmm.
But by the way, if they do object, it could put the property in foreclosure. And the seller, the loan servicer, very likely might start foreclosure proceedings. And if they don't, then what's happened is you've wrapped a loan around someone else and you may or may not be released of liability from it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's just say that this particular buyer is looking at properties that are paid off. That's a different story. There might be a lot of equity in the property, it's completely paid off, and they're wanting to do a seller finance. So what they're wanting to do is use the seller's equity as their own bank.
Mm-hmm.
And the seller can leave, seller is not going to get their full equity out, and they're going to get paid as if they were a lender. There's a lot of risks with that. Most people want to sell their home, take their cash, have no more risk or liability for that property, have ownership transfer, everything paid off, and take their check and move on. That's most sellers. I get these types of emails often, especially when people want to flip a property.
Mm-hmm.
They want to take it over. They would rather not get a short-term loan for it. They would rather just give them a down payment, do a seller finance, flip it, sell it, and then pay the seller off. That could be an arrangement that works.
Mm-hmm.
I try not to have an opinion on these things because it's not my opinion of how a seller sells a property. It's not really should be my opinion of how a buyer buyers a property. People pay us for our experience,
Mm-hmm.
and our job is to advise the clients and point them in the right direction. And if we think attorney needs to get involved, or if an attorney needs to get involved, recommend that they get one. So I think in situations like this, if an agent doesn't or hasn't dealt with a situation quite like that before, they need to get with their sales manager, their team lead.
Yep.
They need to be
Think
properly
so.
canceled so the consumer understands what risks are associated with this proposal, because it's an offer.
It is an offer, and we have a duty to present all offers.
That's right. Even if it's ridiculous, even if the agent doesn't like it, even if it's offensive, all the things, and especially when the agent thinks, gosh, this seller is going to yell at me when I present this offer. Even then, we have to present the offer. So I think we are honest and open about the offer, present it, let the seller know what it means. And if we have questions, because we don't have a full understanding of what this email means, we ask them to throw an offer at us so that we can actually present an offer.
Yep.
Those are very confusing for an agent because, typically there's no actual offer.
There's not.
Signed, promulgated 1-4 family or whatever. It's just, a couple lines in the body of an email that talks about, what maybe the purchase price would be and a few pieces of information associated with it. And then you don't really have the rest of the story there to present to the client. So sometimes we do need more information, but present the offer and present it fairly and objectively. The law says that in presentation of offers, we have to present the offer objectively and fairly, and it could easily be that an agent does not objectively present that offer.
That is true. Yeah, I see that happen a lot, unfortunately. Especially if the offer doesn't appear to have a lot of things in favor for them or the seller.
We're getting to a point, November 2025, where we've come from a buyer market to the strongest sellers market of all time. In 2008, 2010, we were in buyer market territory. In the financial crisis, the financial downturn, 2020, 2021, we converted to the strongest sellers market of all time because the inventory numbers tanked due to COVID and lack of supply chains. And now 2025, 5 years post-COVID, we are seeing inventory numbers increase, which means that buyers have more choices, sellers have to work harder to get their home sold. Maybe they need to do more repairs and more upgrades. And so sometimes these offers that are creative, sometimes they can meet the buyer's needs and meet the seller needs and it work out. So yeah, I think that the agent needs to make sure that, just like I said, present it objectively, let the seller know what that looks like, and let the seller decide what it is that they want to do. And if there's risk or something involved in that offer that's just doesn't feel right, get with your manager, get an attorney if you need to do that as well, and help the seller understand what this offer looks like.
Great answer, because I love these. And I see some benefits in these sometimes as well.
Sometimes.
Like you said, sometimes they are. Well, that's all the questions we have for today.
Good times. Well, thank you everyone for stopping by the Broker podcast. Michael, thank you for bringing the questions and all that you do for us. If you would like to bring us a question, simply email manager@realtytexas.com. Michael will add it to the list, and we will read it live on our next podcast.
All right. Sounds good.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.